Every year, over 300 million people visit the United States National Park System. Families pack up their cars, pitch their nylon tents, and take pictures of the breathtaking vistas. We look at the glossy brochures, the marked trails, and the smiling park rangers in their crisp green uniforms, and we believe a very comforting lie. We believe that because these lands are owned by the government, they are safe. We believe they are controlled. But the map is not the territory. Behind the marked tourist trails, there are tens of millions of acres of dense, unmapped, unforgiving wilderness. Deep, silent canyons that have never seen a human footprint. Ancient groves of old-growth timber where the canopy is so thick the sun never touches the forest floor. The rangers who patrol these vast, isolating stretches of wilderness know the truth. They know that the woods have eyes. They know that when the radio goes dead in the middle of a shift, you are entirely, terrifyingly on your own. Welcome back to Prince of Darkness. Before we step off the marked trail and into the dark, do me a favor. Hit that like button right now to appease the algorithm and help this channel survive. And if you are brave enough to uncover the classified secrets of the deep woods, subscribe and turn on all notifications. Tonight, we are exploring 4 highly classified, untold accounts from veteran park rangers and search and rescue officers. These are the terrifying true stories of the dead zones, the places where the radios pick up things they shouldn't, where the compasses spin wildly, and where the people who go looking for the missing become the hunted. Zip up your tent, turn off your flashlight, and whatever you do, if you hear your own voice calling for help on the radio, do not answer. Our first account comes from a former Forest Service fire lookout named David. Fire lookouts spend months completely isolated in small glass-enclosed cabins perched on top of 70-foot metal towers, tasked with scanning hundreds of miles of deep forest for the first signs of wildfire. It is a job defined by absolute, crushing solitude. In the summer of 2004, I was stationed at a fire lookout tower deep in the Bitterroot National Forest in Idaho. My tower was located in Sector 4, a geographically isolated, deeply rugged area of the park. My only connection to the outside world was a heavy-duty, multi-channel two-way radio connected to a massive antenna on the roof. I hadn't seen another human face in over 6 weeks. It was mid-August. A massive, dry lightning storm had rolled into the valley around 11 p.m. The thunder was deafening, physically shaking the glass panes of my small cabin. I was sitting at my desk in the pitch black, watching the lightning strike the distant ridges, holding my radio mic, reporting the strike coordinates to base camp. At exactly 1:15 a.m., my main radio channel, the encrypted frequency exclusively used by park rangers and emergency services, suddenly erupted in a violent, abrasive static. I reached out and adjusted the squelch dial, trying to filter out the atmospheric interference from the storm. Then a voice broke through the white noise. "Base? Copy? Please, help." It was a man's voice. He sounded exhausted, breathless, and terrified. But the signal was incredibly weak, constantly dipping in and out of the static. I immediately grabbed my microphone and keyed it. "Base camp, this is Tower 4. I am picking up a distress call on the encrypted channel. Do you copy?" There was a long pause. Then the night dispatcher at base camp replied, "Tower 4, this is base. We copy. We are not picking up any distress signals on our end. The storm must be bouncing a localized signal up to your altitude. See if you can get a location. Over." I keyed the mic again. "Unidentified caller, this is Forest Service Tower 4. I hear you. What is your emergency and what is your location? Over." The radio hissed violently for 10 agonizing seconds. Then the voice came back, slightly clearer. "My leg is broken. I fell. It's so dark. Tower 4, please. I'm at the bottom of the granite ravine, near the 3 dead pines." I immediately pulled my detailed topographical map of Sector 4 across the desk, shining my small red lens flashlight on it. My blood ran cold. There were no granite ravines in Sector 4. The geology of my entire sector was strictly sedimentary rock and sloping soil. Furthermore, there were no hiking trails within 20 miles of my tower. "Caller, you are on a restricted Forest Service frequency. Can you verify your coordinates? There is no granite ravine in this sector. How did you get this frequency? Over." The voice didn't answer my questions. Instead, it started weeping. A heavy, pathetic, terrified sobbing that echoed through the small speaker in my dark cabin. "It's looking at me," the voice whispered. The audio so clear it sounded like the man was standing right behind my chair. "Tower 4, it has my face. God, it has my face." "Caller, who is looking at you? What is your status?" I yelled into the mic. The crying suddenly stopped. The radio went dead silent, not even static. I waited for 5 minutes, calling out repeatedly. Nothing. I radioed base camp and demanded they send a search and rescue team at first light, giving them the vague description of the 3 dead pines. The next morning, the storm cleared. A helicopter swept the entire 20-mile radius around my tower. They found absolutely nothing. No broken hiker, no camp, no granite ravine. But 3 days later, a ground patrol mapping a completely different sector of the park, over 40 miles away from my tower, found something. They found an old, deep granite sinkhole that wasn't on any modern map. At the bottom of the sinkhole lay the body of a man. He had been dead for at least 6 months. His leg was severely broken. Next to his skeletal remains was a standard civilian walkie-talkie. Its batteries were corroded, and it was completely destroyed by water damage. When the authorities identified the body, it was a hiker who had gone missing the previous winter. But here is the terrifying part, the part that forced me to resign from the Forest Service and never step foot in a lookout tower again. The civilian walkie-talkie they found next to his body did not have the technological capability to broadcast on our highly encrypted proprietary Forest Service frequency. It was physically, technologically impossible for his radio to reach my tower. And more importantly, if he had been dead for 6 months, whose voice was I talking to in the middle of that thunderstorm? And what was it looking at in the dark? If the isolation of a fire tower is terrifying, the sheer chaotic panic of a search and rescue operation in the deep woods is a completely different kind of nightmare. When a person goes missing in the national park system, time is the ultimate enemy. The deeper the rescue teams go into the unmapped zones, the more the natural laws of the forest seem to bend. This account comes from a veteran search and rescue tracking specialist who operated in the dense, suffocating forests of the Pacific Northwest. In search and rescue, we rely heavily on trained canine units. A tracking dog can smell a lost child's scent on a single blade of grass days after they've passed. But we are also trained to watch the dog's behavior. If a highly trained bloodhound suddenly tucks its tail, refuses to walk forward, and begins whining in sheer terror, you do not force it to go. You unholster your sidearm and you slowly back away. because the dog smells an apex predator that you cannot see. It was late November. The air was freezing, hovering just above sleet. We were on day 3 of a search for a 22-year-old experienced hiker named Brian who had vanished off a well-marked trail. I was leading a small ground team of 4 men, including a canine handler named Miller and his tracking dog, a massive German shepherd named Duke. We were pushing deep into a heavily forested, steep ravine that was entirely off the grid. The canopy of old-growth pines was so thick above us that it blocked out the sun, plunging the ravine into a state of perpetual, gloomy twilight. We were communicating with base camp and the other search teams via short-range VHF radios. At around 3 p.m., Duke caught a scent. He pulled hard on his leash, nose to the ground, dragging Miller through the thick, wet ferns. We followed, our adrenaline spiking. We thought we had found Brian. Duke led us to the edge of a massive, impossibly dense grove of dead, twisted cedar trees. The moment we reached the edge of the dead grove, Duke violently hit the brakes. He planted his paws deep into the mud, his hair bristling aggressively from his neck to his tail. He didn't bark. He let out a low, vibrating, terrified whimper and aggressively backed up, trying to pull Miller away from the trees. "What is it, Duke? Bear?" Miller asked, drawing his bear mace. The woods inside the grove were unnaturally silent. There was no wind, no rustling. Suddenly, my VHF radio, clipped to my chest rig, cracked to life. "Team 2, we found him!" It was the voice of Captain Harris, the leader of Team 2, who was supposed to be searching a grid 3 miles north of our position. His voice sounded distorted, layered with thick static. I keyed my mic. "Harris, this is Team 1. Repeat your last. You found Brian. What is his condition? Over." The radio hissed. "Team 1, found him. He's in the trees. Come into the trees." I looked at Miller. The message didn't make tactical sense. Harris wasn't giving coordinates, and he was using improper radio etiquette. "Harris, confirm your GPS coordinates. Are you requesting medical evac? Over," I demanded. The radio went silent. Then, a sound came through the speaker that made my stomach drop into my boots. It was a laugh, but it wasn't a normal laugh. It was a distorted, mechanical, broken mimicry of Captain Harris's laugh. It sounded like an audio recording of a human laugh being played backward at half speed through a blown-out speaker. "Ha, ha, ha, come into the trees." Before I could react, I heard another radio transmission, but this time it wasn't coming from the speaker on my chest. It was coming from inside the dead cedar grove, about 50 yards ahead of us, hidden in the impenetrable shadows. It was a voice calling out, unamplified by a radio. "Miller, what is it, Duke? Bear?" My blood ran ice cold. It was Miller's exact voice, the exact sentence he had spoken out loud not 2 minutes ago. The intonation, the pitch, the slight hesitation. It was a flawless, terrifying acoustic mirror. Miller went pale. He drew his sidearm. Duke was spinning in circles, whining in absolute, unfiltered panic. Then another voice echoed from the dark trees. "Harris, this is Team 1. Repeat your last." It was my voice. Whatever was hiding in that dense, dark grove of dead trees had been listening to us. It had perfectly recorded our voices, and now it was playing them back to us, trying to bait us to step off the safe path and walk into the shadows. "Fall back. "Now," I whispered, grabbing Miller by the shoulder. "Do not run, just walk backward." We slowly retreated up the steep, muddy embankment of the ravine, keeping our eyes locked on the dark grove, our weapons drawn. As we climbed, the voices from the trees grew louder, more frantic, overlapping each other in a chaotic, psychotic chorus. "Come into the trees. What is his condition? Ha, ha, ha. Found him. Bear?" We didn't stop retreating until we reached the marked trail, miles away. When we finally re-established clear radio contact with base camp, I demanded to speak to Captain Harris. Harris responded immediately. He confirmed that his team was still 3 miles north. He confirmed he had never broadcasted that he found Brian, and he had absolutely no idea what I was talking about. We never found Brian. The search was officially called off 5 days later due to severe weather. I still work in search and rescue, but I have a new unbreakable personal rule. If I am in the deep woods and I hear my own voice calling to me from the dark, I treat it as a hostile threat, because out there, in the unmapped zones, there are predators that have evolved to hunt the ultimate prey, us. And they know exactly how to lure us in. If you speak to enough veteran park rangers off the record, in the quiet corners of local bars after their shifts end, you will eventually hear about the stairs. It is an urban legend that permeates the Forest Service, a story whispered among search and rescue teams. But for a retired ranger named Thomas, who patrolled the vast, rugged expanse of the Adirondacks, it wasn't a legend. It was a career-ending reality. I was 28 years old, physically fit, and intimately familiar with my sector of the park. It was mid-October. The tourist season had heavily died down, and the deep woods were returning to their natural, quiet state. I was dispatched on a routine search. A 20-year-old college student had wandered off a clearly marked trail to take photographs of the autumn foliage and hadn't returned to his campsite. It wasn't an emergency yet. The weather was mild, and we assumed he had just gotten turned around in the brush. I took my standard gear, my radio, and my sidearm, and hiked about 5 miles deep into the unmapped zone where his last known trajectory pointed. Around 4 p.m., the shadows in the forest began to violently stretch. The natural light filtering through the canopy turned a sickly pale yellow. The sounds of the forest, the woodpeckers, the rustling squirrels, completely stopped. The silence was absolute. It felt thick, like I was walking underwater. I pushed through a dense, nearly impenetrable wall of thorn bushes and stumbled into a perfectly circular clearing. My brain completely failed to process what I was looking at. Standing in the absolute dead center of this muddy, remote clearing was a staircase. It wasn't the ruins of an old cabin. There was no foundation, no walls, no debris. It was just a single, perfectly constructed freestanding flight of wooden stairs, complete with a beautifully carved mahogany handrail. The wood was pristine. It wasn't rotting. There were no leaves resting on the steps. It looked as if it had been plucked directly from a Victorian mansion and dropped from the sky into the middle of a primeval forest. Every survival instinct I possessed, every evolutionary alarm bell in my DNA screamed at me that this object did not belong here. It was an impossible geometry. I grabbed my radio to call base camp. I pressed the transmit button. Instead of the usual static or the voice of the dispatcher, my radio emitted a sound I had never heard before. It was a high-pitched, oscillating frequency, mixed with what sounded like hundreds of people whispering simultaneously. It was deafening. I tore the radio off my belt and dropped it into the mud. I stared at the stairs. The top step led to absolutely nothing, just the empty air of the clearing. But as I stared at that top step, I felt a terrifying, overwhelming, and unnatural psychological compulsion. A deep, magnetic pull in my chest. A voice in my head that wasn't my own was violently urging me to walk up the steps. It promised that if I just climbed to the top, I would see something beautiful. I would understand everything. I took a physical, robotic step forward, then another. I was entirely, completely losing control of my own motor functions. I raised my right boot and placed it on the bottom, pristine wooden step. The very second my boot touched the wood, the absolute silence of the clearing was shattered. Coming from the top step, from the empty air, I heard the distinct, heavy, terrifying sound of a boot violently stomping down on the wood. Thud. Someone or something invisible was standing at the top of the stairs, and it had just taken a step down toward me. The shock of the sound snapped the hypnotic spell. I violently jerked my foot off the bottom step, stumbled backward into the mud, grabbed my radio screaming, and ran. I ran blindly through the thorn bushes, tearing my uniform, cutting my face, completely abandoning all my training. I ran until I hit a logging road and flagged down another ranger. When I finally caught my breath and looked at my watch, my stomach violently dropped. It was 9 p.m. It was pitch black outside. I had stepped into that clearing at 4 p.m. I had stared at the stairs for what felt like 2 minutes. I had lost 5 hours of my life. They found the missing college student 3 days later, wandering aimlessly on a highway 20 miles away. He had no memory of where he had been. He was severely dehydrated, completely catatonic, and his hair, which had been brown in his driver's license photo, had turned stark paper white. He never spoke again. I don't know what those stairs are. I don't know who builds them or where they lead, but I know that the wilderness is full of doorways that should never, ever be opened. Our final, highly classified account takes us to the brutal, freezing isolation of Yellowstone National Park during the dead of winter. When the park is buried under 10 feet of snow, the roads are completely impassable to normal vehicles. The only humans left in the park are a skeleton crew of winter caretakers and specialized rangers who patrol the vast frozen wasteland in heavy, armored snowcats. I was a winter caretaker stationed near the remote southern border of Yellowstone. During a massive January blizzard, the park becomes an alien planet. You are completely cut off from humanity. The temperature drops to 30 below zero. The snowcats we drive are essentially tanks, massive, heated cabins sitting on heavy metal treads. They are designed to keep you alive in the most hostile environments on Earth. It was 2 a.m. I was driving my snowcat across a massive frozen flat plain, doing a routine perimeter check to ensure no snowmobilers had illegally entered the restricted thermal zones. The blizzard was blinding. The heavy halogen lights of the snowcat only cut about 20 feet into the furious, swirling whiteout. Suddenly, my emergency dashboard beacon lit up. It was a distress signal, a localized SOS pinging on my emergency frequency. The coordinates were about 2 miles east of my position, deep in a heavily restricted, completely unpopulated thermal area where the ground is dangerously unstable. I engaged the heavy tracks, turning the snowcat eastward, plowing violently through the massive snowdrifts. It took me 40 minutes to navigate the treacherous terrain. When I finally arrived at the coordinates, my high beams illuminated the source of the ping. It was an old, abandoned wooden ranger cabin, half buried in the snow. It hadn't been actively used in decades. I left the massive diesel engine of the Snowcat idling to keep the cabin heated, grabbed my high-powered rifle and my flashlight, and unlatched the heavy metal door of the Snowcat. I stepped down into the waist-deep snow. That's when I saw the tracks. Leading away from the front door of the abandoned cabin, illuminated perfectly by my headlights, was a set of footprints. But they weren't human. They were bipedal, walking on two legs, but they were impossibly huge. The prints were at least 2 feet long, pressed so deeply into the compacted snow that whatever made them had to weigh over 800 pounds. And the stride length, the distance between each step, was nearly 12 feet. I traced the massive footprints with my flashlight. They didn't lead into the forest. They led directly from the cabin door, straight to the passenger side of my idling Snowcat. My breath caught in my throat. I swung my flashlight toward my vehicle. Standing on the opposite side of my Snowcat, partially obscured by the heavy metal treads, was a massive, towering shadow. The blizzard was whipping snow violently around it, making it impossible to see distinct features, but it stood at least 9 feet tall. Its shoulders were terrifyingly broad, and its arms hung down past its knees. It wasn't moving. It was just standing there in the blinding snow, watching me. Then, my VHF radio, resting on the dashboard inside the locked, heated cab of my Snowcat, suddenly turned on. The volume was cranked to the maximum. But it wasn't a distress call. Blasting from the radio speakers, loud enough for me to hear over the roaring diesel engine and the howling blizzard, was the sound of heavy, wet, incredibly deep breathing. Hurrah. Hurrah. The entity standing on the other side of my Snowcat tilted its massive head, the breathing coming from my radio perfectly synchronized with the rise and fall of its dark, massive chest. It was broadcasting its own breathing over my secure emergency frequency. It was playing a psychological game with me. I didn't try to shoot it. A rifle wouldn't stop something that massive, and if I missed, I was dead. I had less than 10 seconds before the freezing temperature killed me anyway. I threw myself back into the driver's seat of the Snowcat, slammed the heavy metal door shut, and threw the massive deadbolt lock. The moment the lock clicked, the massive entity violently slammed its fists onto the roof of my Snowcat. Bam! The entire 5-ton vehicle rocked violently on its treads. The heavy, reinforced, bulletproof glass of my windshield cracked, sending a terrifying spiderweb pattern across my vision. I slammed the transmission into reverse. The heavy treads dug into the snow, the engine roaring in protest as the vehicle lurched backward. The entity didn't chase me. As I backed away, my headlights caught it standing perfectly still in the blizzard, a towering, terrifying monolith of dark fur and impossible geometry. The radio continued to broadcast that heavy, wet breathing for another 10 miles before it finally faded into static. I drove straight back to base camp, locked myself in the communications room, and resigned the next morning. I don't know what triggered that SOS beacon, but I know it was a trap. The wilderness doesn't just want to survive. Sometimes, it actively wants to hunt. We look at the maps provided by the National Park Service, and we see neat colored lines. We see designated campsites, visitor centers, and scenic overlooks. We see a controlled, highly managed version of nature. But the map is an illusion. Just a few miles off the marked trail, the illusion shatters. The rules of human civilization simply cease to exist. Out there, in the unmapped dead zones, in the shadow of the fire towers and the forgotten thermal plains, there are ancient, terrifying ecosystems that operate on logic we cannot comprehend. The rangers in these stories survived because they recognized that they were no longer the apex predator. They listened to their fear and they ran. The next time you visit a national park and you feel the sudden, inexplicable urge to step off the trail to see what is hiding behind the tree line, remember the stairs in the clearing. Remember the voices in the dark. Stay on the path, keep your radio close, and pray that you don't hear your own voice calling back to you. If you have your own terrifying, unexplained encounter from the deep woods, leave it in the comments below. I read every single one, and your story might be featured in our next descent into the dark. If this documentary made you rethink your next hiking trip, hit that like button to appease the algorithm and subscribe to Prince of Darkness for more deep dive true horror. Until next time, respect the boundaries, double check your locks, and stay out of the deep woods. Good night.